Welcome in on a Thursday, everybody. I'm Reed Cowan. Crossing a red line. The leader of Hezbollah vows to strike back for what he calls Israel going too far in a series of explosions through infiltrated devices. And back here in the United States, our video feeds watching that Texas pipeline fire still burning in real time. It's trying to burn itself out. Not there yet. After days of evacuations, families are finally able to go home. This is CBS News 24/7. Let's go. Okay, but right off the top, our live feeds focused on Washington, D.C., where President Joe Biden will be speaking very shortly. The commander-in-chief addressing the Economic Club of Washington just one day after the Federal Reserve decided to slash interest rates. When President Biden speaks and gets to that podium, you will hear it right here on CBS News 24/7. But right now, let's go to the Middle East. Hezbollah and Israel trading new strikes against each other. At least 2 Israeli soldiers killed in the latest series of violence. And this just in, the Israeli defense minister says Hezbollah will pay an increasing price. This comes after Hezbollah's leader spoke out publicly for the first time following back-to-back explosive attacks in Lebanon, using pagers and walkie-talkies, even some solar devices. In all, 20 people killed there, more than 3,000 others injured. The latest happened yesterday, and a day earlier, pagers exploded. Hezbollah blaming Israel for the attack, saying they crossed a red line. Listen.
Thousands of pagers were targeted by the Israeli enemy and detonated at the same time. With this operation, the enemy crossed all rules, laws and red lines. It didn't care about anything at all, not morally, not humanely.
CBS News correspondent Imtiaz Tayyab is in Beirut following the latest escalations between Israel and Hezbollah and has this report.
Well, we're frankly in uncharted territory after a second day of synchronized explosions of hundreds, if not thousands, of communication devices turned bombs here in Lebanon that are being blamed on Israel. Many people here telling us they no longer trust their own handheld devices. Now, this, of course, comes after we've now seen 48 hours of explosions across Lebanon. The first, of course, being pagers, which had exploded almost simultaneously across the country, killing around 12 people and injuring around 2,700. Some of those injuries involve people having lost their eyes or even their fingers. Then, again, just a day later, we saw walkie-talkies exploding, this resulting in the deaths of over 20 people and injuries of hundreds more. Now, all of this comes at a time when Hezbollah says that it blames Israel for these explosions, but of course trying to understand how Israel was able to infiltrate its communications and perhaps more importantly, weaponize them. Now, we've been doing some of our own reporting and have found that there are some shell companies which connections to Hungary, which may have been used by Israeli intelligence services, but Israel, of course, is not confirming. Now, this as Hezbollah vows revenge for the booby-trapped devices, and as Israel's defense minister has announced a, quote, new phase of the war, saying the center of gravity has shifted to the north, and forces from Gaza are now being moved to the northern front with Hezbollah, sparking fears an all-out regional war is closer now than ever before. Read.
So U.S. officials say the U.S. had nothing to do with this. So let's look at this through the lens of the U.S. perspective. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in France meeting with President Emmanuel Macron and other top European diplomats. Blinken spoke just moments ago about the situation in Lebanon.
France and the United States are united in calling for restraint and urging de-escalation when it comes to the Middle East in general and when it comes to Lebanon in particular. We continue to work to get a ceasefire for Gaza over the finish line. And as we discussed with some of you just a day ago in Egypt, we believe that remains both possible and necessary. But meanwhile, we don't want to see any escalatory actions by any party that make that even more difficult.
So the same message emphasized and re-emphasized. U.S. officials say the U.S. government and military did not have a role in these attacks in any way, and they are also vowing to investigate. Back here in the United States, members of Congress facing a ticking clock as they feel the pressure to act fast to avoid a government shutdown. So here's what's happened. Let's get you caught up. The House failed to pass a measure yesterday So with just 11 days to go before the government runs out of money, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries spoke about what needs to be done.
Now that their efforts have failed, House Republicans don't seem to have any plan for actually keeping the government open. So the Senate will step in. Later today, I'll file cloture on a legislative vehicle that will enable us to prevent a Trump shutdown in the event that Speaker Johnson does not work with us in a bipartisan, bicameral manner.
The House has a responsibility to keep the government open and meet the needs of the American people. Pursuant to the United States Constitution, all appropriations bills have to initiate in the House of Representatives. The extreme MAGA Republicans are determined to shut the government down and hurt everyday Americans because they are on an ideological crusade.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now live. Scott, how is Schumer's plan any different from Mike Johnson's plan?
We love our Star Trek language here in Washington. Let me decode what Chuck Schumer just said when he said invoke cloture on a legislative vehicle. What he means is the Senate's going to come up with its own plan to avert a government shutdown. They're going to do it in a way that'll pass, and then they'll push it over to the House and try to leverage them into accepting it so the lights don't go off and the doors don't lock up federal government-wide September 30th. It'll likely be a short-term plan, just 3 months, to get them through basically December so that the Congress that has just been voted on a month earlier can hash all this out before the new year begins, before the new president takes over. The Senate's stepping in here to try to find something that will work because the House very much could not.
Well, and we're learning a new word today, word of the day, cloture, and Scott decoding it for us. Scott, let's pivot a little bit. You are outside the D.C. federal courthouse right now, where several suspects face sentencing for their involvement in the January 6th Capitol riot and attack. What can you tell us about that process?
I can see the Capitol from where I'm standing. They're actually beginning the construction of the inaugural platform for January 20th, which is telling because the case going on behind me in the federal court is a group of defendants who pushed past the police line outside that inaugural platform January 6, 2021. 4 defendants convicted of assaulting police. The Department of Justice will seek 9 years for this group, but this case has had special significance from the jump. This group's accused of being the tip of the spear. The group that led a procession of rioters past a vulnerable point, a police line at the outset of the riot. They're accused of toppling over officers who feared they were going to be trampled, who were badly hurt, and they were, in a sense, according to the Department of Justice, leaders at a pivotal break point. We'll see what the Department of Justice argues as this afternoon continues, but 2 things worth monitoring. What the judge hands down as a sentence that could impact hundreds of cases still to come, and there are hundreds, but also what does the judge say about the importance of deterrence, of deterring future attacks this close to an election where baseless election claims are again spiraling.
Hey, Scott, before we let you go, you also have an update on something else that's driven a narrative in this presidential cycle, Hunter Biden's criminal gun case. What's the latest on that?
His sentencing on that first charge of that gun charge which he was convicted earlier this year in June, the sentencing's been pushed back almost to the end of the year. It was supposed to happen in a few weeks. Instead, it's now scheduled for December 4th. Noteworthy for a few reasons. It's near the end of the Biden presidency. If there's going to be a thought of commutation or pardons, though the White House has said no. Also, the delay is in part because he's got another case. That California tax case to which he's pleaded guilty also goes to sentencing. It's just a lot of work, the limited bandwidth for the defendant and his lawyers.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane, thank you as always for your report. When we come back, we've told you about the series of freeway shootings in Kentucky, the manhunt that's ensued. Now it looks like there could be some closure in this. And you know who's going to decide that? A coroner. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Vice President Kamala Harris fighting for every vote she can in the battleground state of Michigan tonight, and she's doing it via a live stream with media mogul Oprah Winfrey. CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns is in Detroit, has a preview. Caitlin, when you bring in Oprah Winfrey, you've got both boxing gloves on and you're hoping for big results.
Yeah, Reed, 47 days to go until Election Day, so it is crunch time for these campaigns. They are traversing these battleground states. I've been in Michigan all week because both Harris and Trump have been here this week. So bringing Oprah Winfrey, she endorsed Harris. Of course, she spoke at the Democratic National Convention earlier this summer. And the focus here today is really on turning out black women voters, especially. So especially in a state like Michigan, the margin of victory for Joe Biden back in 2020 was just about 150,000 votes. We've been talking all cycle about how this election is going to run through states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. These states will help determine who wins the presidency. And with margins that slim, and with our polling showing Trump and Harris neck and neck, you really need to focus on every voter you can turn out.
Caitlin, you mentioned the word endorsement. So while you're in Michigan, I want to really drill down and talk about this. We just saw the news that the Teamsters Union is not, as a national organization, going to endorse either candidate, but you say that the state organization of the Teamsters is going to. Tell us what the difference is there.
Yeah, Reed, this is a very influential union, over 1 million members, and in states like here in Michigan, the union vote is really critical. So for the first time in a really long time, the national union said that they're not endorsing either candidate, even though their own internal polling showed that their members favored Trump over Harris. But we spent time with a local union leader, a local Teamsters leader here in Michigan who oversees all of the Teamsters across this state, who says that he is supporting Harris and he's trying to get his members to turn out for her also. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I believe that each state will take care of their business. They will turn out their votes. Michigan, we will focus for another 47 days, every day of the week, to make sure that all of labor unions in the state of Michigan are working together for one common cause to make sure we elect Kamala Harris and all the down ballot Democrats that are running in Michigan.
So this really speaks to kind of the nuances of the union vote. You have kind of the national stance and then the local stance. So we'll be keeping an eye on that when it comes to the Teamsters. Remember, the United Auto Workers Union president and the national union there supports Kamala Harris. But we've been talking to voters here on the ground who are part of that union as well and are supporting Donald Trump. So the union vote is critical here, and it's not a monolithic group. But in a state like Michigan, turning out those voters could make a difference in this key race.
Calm waters there behind you, Caitlin, in Detroit. Beautiful shot amidst talking about some rough political waters. We will wait and see if Oprah can rock the boat, so to speak. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is in Washington today at an event fighting anti-Semitism. So the former president also will be at the Israeli-American Council National Summit. And also, while we're talking about that, we know there will be no further debates between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, but voters can see the candidates for vice president debate one another head-to-head. CBS News will host the only vice presidential debate between Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz on Tuesday. That's October 1st in New York. You can catch it live, all of our coverage on CBS, and of course streaming on CBS News 24/7 and Paramount+. Some big developing news as we bring up our Kentucky map and monitors right now. And here's your headline. That suspect in a series of highway shootings earlier this month may have been found dead. Early word from police, the remains found likely belong to Joseph Couch. They tell us they also found a weapon with the body. The body is now with the coroner for identification and cause of death. All 5 people shot in those highway shootings are relieved that this news has come through, and they are awaiting the confirmation from the coroner that indeed that is Couch. Our video feeds take you to Texas now, where you can see here that pipeline we first brought you is breaking these last several days. Fire still going there, continuing to shoot out of that pipe, albeit less fire than when we first broke the story. This is in Deer Park, about 20 miles outside of Houston. A lot of families put out of their homes for days because of that explosion caused by an off-course SUV, but now some of those families, well, they can go back home. City officials lifted those evacuation orders. Let's talk about this. Boeing and its striking workers have not made progress yet on a resolution, but there is some optimism, at least from Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He says he believes both sides do indeed want to reach an agreement. They're working towards it with that federal mediator in the room. Meanwhile, though, Boeing CEO says the company will start furloughing a lot of employees to try to conserve cash and losses during that strike. Our live feeds taking us now to the Midwest in Minneapolis, where storms are on the way. Jess, you wouldn't know it by looking at that iconic WCCO CBS tower, but You say the radar says otherwise.
Oh, that radar is showing active weather throughout the whole Midwest, actually. So let's start off taking a look at our virtual reality map. There's storms all throughout the Midwest that are going to start popping up throughout the afternoon and evening hours tonight, early morning hours tomorrow. But let's use Futurecast to time this system out because there's heavy thunderstorm activity expected in cities like Minneapolis, as well as places stretching all the way down into Iowa. Now, let's start off with what's happening tonight. See that system just north of it, closer to the Canadian border? That's what's driving in all of this heavy activity in states like Iowa, Wisconsin, all the way over into Illinois. So overnight hours tonight, we are expecting heavy storms as that system sweeps its way through. This means we could see damaging winds, tornado activity, and of course heavy rain in local isolated cities and towns. Now this continues to be the trend as it moves its way now into Indiana, heading into our Friday morning forecast just ahead of a weekend forecast. Now the severe weather outlook showing a slight risk stretching from Kansas all the way up into northern portions of Missouri. So we're keeping a very close eye on areas like St. Louis right now, but we continue to sweep up north of there. Minnesota also impacted by this exact same system, stretched all throughout that region. We can see large hail, anywhere up to around an inch expected, especially in the center of that sliver. We continue to track down Iowa. We are keeping a close eye on our state there tonight as heavy storms are expected to really impact that area. Tornado threat is possible throughout the region. Reed.
All right, Jess, thank you so much. Hey, when we come back on CBS News 24/7, we're going to be talking about President Joe Biden. He's taking to the podium right now, one day after the Federal Reserve said we are going to lower interest rates. What it means for your wallet, coming out of the mouth of the Commander-in-Chief. We come back. Welcome back. Our video monitors take you back to Washington, where the president celebrates the Fed's decision to cut interest rates. He is addressing the Economic Club of Washington as we speak. Let's go ahead and listen in from moments ago.
It's been a painful one, but it's been the pandemic and the inflation it created, causing enormous pain and hardship for families all across America. It's not true just for us, but for every major economy in the world. But now inflation is coming down in the United States. The fact is, it's come down faster and lower than almost any other world's advanced economies. So now instead of looking at interest rates increases, interest rates are going to be coming down, and they're expected to go down further. And that's a good place for us to be. Now, a lot of people, as you all know, maybe you know a few, thought we'd never get here. When Kamala and I came to office, 3,000 people a day were dying of COVID, 3,000 a day. Millions of Americans have lost their jobs, their businesses, and the global economy was in a tailspin. 4 years ago, we inherited the worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. In fact, my predecessor was one of just two presidents in American history who left office with fewer jobs than the day he came to office. The other, Herbert Hoover. When I came to office, there was no real plan in place, no plan to deal with the pandemic. No plan to get the economy back on its feet. Nothing, virtually nothing. In fact, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office predicted we wouldn't see a full recovery until well after the end of my first term in office. But I refused to accept that, like many of you refused to accept it. I came to office determined not only to deliver immediate economic relief for the American people, but to transform the way our economy works over the long term. To write a new economic playbook. Grow the economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not just the top down. Put workers first. Support unions to make sure workers have a bargaining clout they need to get a fair price to grow that pie. And after all, it's the productivity. They're the productivity baked into that pie, in my view. Leave no one behind. Foster fair competition. Invest in all of America and in all Americans. When we do things for the poor, and they have a ladder up, the middle class does very well, and the wealthy continue to do very well. We all do well, and we are doing well. Working families and the middle class are the center of the strong, equitable, and sustainable recovery. Here are the keys from the new playbook, in my view. Within the first 2 months in office, I signed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most significant economic recovery packages in our history. Not a single person on the other team, Republicans, voted for it. It delivered shots in the arm for vaccines, to vaccinate the nation in one of the most sophisticated logistical operations in American history. I found it incredibly difficult to plan that. Without protecting our nation from COVID, our economic recovery would never have taken off. It also delivered immediate economic relief for those who needed it the most. An individual earning less than $75,000 a year received a $1,400 check. So a family of 5 earning less than $150,000 a year could receive as much as $7,000. And by the way, middle-class families like the one I grew up and many of you grew up in, that is a game changer. That saved people's sense of being. It also prevented a wave of evictions, bankruptcies, and delinquencies and defaults that the previous crises weakened the recovery and left working families permanently further behind. I was determined to avoid what Secretary Yellen called the economic scarring that hurt so many Americans and left them behind in the past. We delivered essential funding to states and local governments to keep essential services moving, to keep teachers and first responders on the job, to keep small businesses open, and to build more housing. We also expanded the child tax credit to cut child poverty in half. With the Butch-Lewis Act, we took the most significant action in 50 years to protect the pensions of millions of union workers and retirees. Before we acted, workers faced cuts to their pensions. Now we're restoring the full amount of their pensions, including for workers who previously saw cuts. And there's so much more. But we also know the pandemic led to a surge in inflation.
We're listening to President Joe Biden speaking to the members of the Economic Club of Washington, D.C., the president claiming some wins there, but also doing so during an election season, very much trying to tie Kamala Harris to his administration's work to try to get the economy going after the prior administration, and saying there was no plan with the Trump administration, and that within weeks of coming into office, a new plan was brought in, and now this is President Joe Biden saying, in effect, it worked. Will voters agree with this? We will wait and see. But a lot is happening with our economy right now. Jobless claims fell. The Federal Reserve slashed interest rates, and economists have worried about a tumbling labor market. So the market's showing us in real time and live right now about these potential record-setting numbers across the board. The S&P, the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ jumping as much as 2% on the day. CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger joining us live now. Jill, let's just get to this because we just saw this cross. Mortgage rates fell to the lowest level since February of 2023. Give us some context here. Yesterday, you told us to take a little bit of a breath. Is this a conversation about supply, or is this a conversation about rates?
Look, it's hard to know day to day why things move, okay? So let's be clear that yesterday's reaction, usually the day of reaction to either a jobs report, a GDP report, or a Fed decision, it's usually a very sharp reaction that is often erased in the ensuing sessions. So it's not surprising to me that the markets fell yesterday or up today, but it doesn't even matter because most long-term investors, they don't care day to day. What is important about the things that you mentioned in your intro is precisely the fact that the Federal Reserve is starting its interest cutting campaign. So for the first time in 4.5 years, the Fed is now reversing course because they fear that the problems that are maybe brewing in the labor market are more important and take precedence over inflation, which the Fed believes it has essentially conquered.
So it sounds like you're saying manage expectations a little bit, especially when we look at some of these new reports and the jobs report, Jill.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I will let the viewers know. Let me peel back the onion here a second. I said to everybody, oh, why are we mentioning weekly claims in our intro? Because I think this is sort of meaningless data. I know that we talk about it, but from week to week, that we're not seeing any clear trend in weekly claims. Right. What we know is that the U.S. government has revised its data for the last year and told us that there are 818,000 fewer jobs than initially reported. What we know is the trend of job creation is slowing down. But what is not actually evident is anything in that weekly jobs report. And so, too, with the mortgage data. You know, mortgage rates are going down. Yes, they are down to their lowest levels since 2023. But when you look at the housing information that was out today, what we also know is that the price of homes is so steep And the affordability is so low that we saw existing home sales fall month over month despite lower interest rates. So what that tells you is we've got a housing market that is completely dislocated. There's not enough inventory in the housing market. We can't build homes fast enough. You can ease the requirements for ADUs all you want. There are just not enough units for sale.
Right. And
that is the pressure in the housing market right now.
Jill on Money, as always, you make me see clearer every time I talk to you. We appreciate you so much. Thank you. Hey, when we come back, we have some information about a stabbing behind bars in Boston. We'll go to our CBS partners there for their coverage as they talk to their viewers and let you listen in. Watching our monitors right now and listening in on the State Department briefing right now on these latest attacks in the Middle East with Hezbollah and Israel. They've traded new strikes. Here's what spokesperson Matthew Miller had to say just a moment ago.
See any party escalate this conflict. We think that the best way to solve the very real security challenge that Israel faces is through a diplomatic resolution that would allow thousands of Israeli citizens to return home and allow thousands of Lebanese citizens to return home. We're going to continue to press that on all parties.
What have they shared with you about their plans for the Lebanon offensive?
So I will keep those conversations between our two countries private. We consult with them about a range of security measures all the time, of course. But I will say, in our private diplomatic conversations, we have said what we said publicly to them. What we say publicly to you is the same thing we say privately to them, which is that we do think a diplomatic resolution is by far the best way to address the real security concerns that they have.
And is that something they're still accepting?
They still want a diplomatic resolution, but you can look at their public statements and judge for yourself where they're going. But we still do hear them say that they prefer a diplomatic resolution. That's why we're going to continue, and among other reasons, that's what we'll lost myself in my words. That is one of the reasons why that's what we will continue to push for.
And then I'm curious, is the U.S. still prepared to back Israel if they are to escalate this on a northern front?
So let me make one thing clear. We are committed to the defense of Israel against terrorist organizations. That includes Hamas, it includes Hezbollah, it includes other Iranian proxies. We will continue to stand by Israel's right to defend itself. But we don't want to see any party escalate this conflict, period.
Could I just follow that?
Yeah.
You don't want any party to escalate it. I mean, for example, today.
Making it clear there in his words, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. Hezbollah's leader, by the way, is accusing Israel in 2 coordinated explosions in Lebanon, calling it, quote, a severe blow that crosses many red lines. Moments before that address, Israel launched a new wave of airstrikes against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. Now, meanwhile, in the race for the White House, former President Donald Trump is in Washington, where he is set to participate in a Fighting Anti-Semitism event and address the Israeli-American Council National Summit later today. So let's bring in live CBS News political director Finn Gomez. Now, these things do tie together, especially on the day right now when Donald Trump is about to mingle with some pretty heavy-hitter leaders from the Jewish community.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Reed. And we are 47 days out. And those two events, there's a Fighting Anti-Semitism event in D.C., as you mentioned. Also, he's going to be addressing the Israeli-American Council. That first event, by the way, Reed, is organized by Dr. Miriam Adelson, who's the billionaire mega GOP donor. Donald, she had voted to help. She had said that she'd be supporting Donald Trump's third bid to the White House, and has vowed to spend as much as $100 million of her own money, and has funded a pro-Trump super PAC. So that's part of the reason why he's here. But also, yes, he's attempting to use the Israeli-Hamas war and the division within the Democratic Party as a wedge to win over Jewish voters. They have traditionally voted heavily Democratic over the last few cycles, especially, but he's trying to use that to when you're talking about a battle margins in these battleground states like North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and so forth, I think by trying to appeal to them on this, Michigan as well, especially, you know about the uncommitted movement that is there. He's trying to pull some of those voters into his camp.
You talk about the big money from Dr. Miriam Adelson, the wife of the late Sheldon Adelson. For the viewers who do not know, think Sands Corporation Las Vegas, think gaming, casinos, not only here in the United States, but Macau as well. So some big money. Finn, before we let you go, the FBI says Iranian hackers stole information from the Trump campaign, sent it over to the Biden campaign. Any word from the Biden camp about how they responded to this? And first of all, before we do that, let's go to some sound right now, and then I want to ask you about this.
We have been raising concerns about Iranian cyber actors attempting to influence elections around the world, including U.S. elections, for some time. It was, of course, disclosures by the United States that brought all of this to light. I think these latest attempts are nothing new by the Iranian regime. It's sought to undermine democracies around the globe for years, but of course they're absolutely troubling. Iran should not interfere in our elections. No country should interfere in our elections. And what we will do is continue to expose those countries that attempt to interfere in our elections, and we will hold them accountable for those actions.
So what did the Biden camp, Finn, do with the emails? How did they respond, and any response from the Trump camp?
The the Harris campaign were very clear in their interactions with us and other reporters that these were individuals linked to the campaign, but they were not members of the campaign. But I do think there's some great reporting here by our own Nicole Skanga. But the campaign spokesperson said that they were not aware of any material being sent directly to the campaign. A few individuals were targeted on their personal emails with what looked like spam or phishing attempt. So essentially, those emails came in, but they were unsolicited and they were unreplied to. And the reporting that we have now is that they were not utilized, and so I think that is something that we'll continue to watch. But Donald Trump has quickly pounced on this and saying that essentially the Vice President Harris is in cahoots with Iran. They were illegally spying on me. And saying that giving all the information to the Kamala Harris campaign, that is a mischaracterization, what has actually occurred and what we know of at this point. Reed.
Proof that in an election cycle, all things are indeed political. Finn Gomez, thank you so much for joining us on the stream today. All right, so let's stay with politics. All eyes on battleground Michigan today, and likely more eyes than just locals there. Why? Vice President Kamala Harris is hosting a live stream event in Michigan today with none other than media mogul Oprah Winfrey. The theme is Unite America. It's a conversation held in a state many say Harris needs to win. And the conversation is especially designed to get female voters in Michigan, especially, to go to the polls and vote for the Harris-Walz ticket. Well, when we see it, you see it. And we've got word right now of a stabbing at a maximum security prison. And we want to get to our partners with CBS News Boston. Here's how they broke the story to their viewers where this violence happened. Watch.
New information about the injuries to the correctional officers who were hurt in a stabbing inside of the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center. The union representing the officers is calling for action. WBZ's Beth Germano is live near the prison in Lancaster with the breaking details. Beth?
Well, the Corrections Officers Union is obviously outraged at what happened here. And at a press conference this morning went so far as to say officers should be scared coming to work here every day based on the conditions inside. Behind me, there is a stepped-up police presence at the entrance with the facility now in lockdown. But first, we'll share with you a photo that was shared with us of one of the officers who responded to the attack here last night with facial injuries and concussion. 2 officers were attacked here around 6:20 last night. The most seriously injured still hospitalized with a punctured lung after the union says he was stabbed 12 times in the back. Another officer stabbed in the head and back has been released from the hospital, along with 3 responding officers who were treated. Now, the union says it has been demanding action from the Department of Corrections to essentially cleanse the prison of weapons. Here's what the union president had to say a short time ago.
We've been asking for tactical units to come in here. The department has many resources to facilitate this and to keep this prison safe for staff and inmates. And it seems to be falling on deaf ears lately. We don't know what else to turn to. These are unfortunate events. We've been warning them that this is going to continue to happen until they do something drastic.
Now, the officers were on rounds when this happened, and while it is unclear what weapons were used, the union says inmates are given iPad-like devices when they are registered here. And with those devices, they say they break them down, they take metal pieces, and they fashion those as weapons. But again, it's not clear the weapons that were used here. The Department of Corrections, we have reached out to them. They say they will be issuing a statement later today. The union says it's been seeking a meeting, wants to be debriefed itself. Reporting live from Lancaster, I'm Beth Germano, WBZ News.
And when they know, the Department of Corrections is likely to rethink who gets what and when they're inside that prison. We'll be watching that story. So let's stay in Boston right now, because likely that investigation will be taking place under the cover of a lot of rain. This is what Boston looks like right there, the Prudential Tower. It's misty there, and that mist is going to turn into rain, Jess.
High surf and coastal flood advisories are still in effect right now out there too, and we continue to keep a close eye all throughout the East Coast as they've been dealing with some active weather recently. Potential tropical cyclone 8 swept throughout all the West Coast, starting in South Carolina, East Coast, making its way up all the way into the Northeast. And now we continue to keep a close eye on the tropics as we head into the coming days. Take a look behind me real fast. This is what's happening for us all throughout the states. Gearing up for some warm weather in the forecast, whether you live in the West Coast, up in the north, or stretching all the way down into the Southwest too. I mean, we have been dealing with some very fall-like weather recently, but now we're starting to see more summer-like conditions. So as I show you the map below me real fast, I want to show you our daytime highs for today, starting off over in Boston, where we are dealing with that active weather right now, holding on tight to 80s and 70s, anywhere from Norfolk stretching up into Boston and everywhere in between as we make our way off into the south now, closer to at least Texas. I mean, Dallas is sitting at 98 degrees, but relative humidity is high there. So warm conditions this afternoon, especially by about 5 to 10 degrees. You add that to what we're at right now, it is going to be a warm one this afternoon. Los Angeles holding on tight to 70s. It was just last week as many firefighters were battling 3 major fires throughout the Los Angeles County. They're also dealing with triple-digit weather, but now we're starting to see some relief in sight, gearing up for another warm-up heading into fall, Reed.
Well-deserved relief. They are exhausted out on the fire lines, Jess. Thank you. Hey, when we come back, we're going to dig deeper on something you heard Jill Schlesinger talk about, the need for housing and the fact that we cannot see houses built fast enough in the United States, the effect on the housing market. We've got our eye on America, your stories and your communities when we come back. Want to get to some big developing news as we bring up our Kentucky map and monitors. Now, here's your headline on this one. The suspect in a series of highway shootings earlier this month may have been found dead. So there's early word right now from police the remains likely belong to Joseph Couch. They tell us they also found a weapon with his body. That body now with the coroner for identification and cause of death. By the way, all 5 people shot in that string of highway shootings relieved at this news while they await the coroner's confirmation. We'll be watching. Our video feeds now take us to Texas, where you can see here that pipeline we first brought you as breaking news the last several days. It's still burning out there. Fire continues shooting out of the pipe, albeit a little less fire. This is in Deer Park, about 20 miles away from Houston. People evacuated now are able to go back in. Those families out of their homes for days because of that explosion. You see the SUV right there. That's what investigators say caused that explosion. Good news, though, families told to get out in the early hours can now go back home and see what the damage is to their property. City officials now lifting slowly those evacuation orders. Boeing and its striking workers have not made any progress yet on a resolution, even with federal mediators in the room. But there is some optimism, at least from Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He tells CBS he believes both sides earnestly want to reach an agreement. Meanwhile, Boeing CEO says the company will have to start furloughing a lot of employees to try to conserve cash during the strike. Let's go international now. Our monitor's bringing us this video out of Portugal. And you can hear the raging wildfires. They're eating up the hillsides. Firefighters are racing to contain more than 100 of these fires, started by suspected arsonists. This is deadly, too. At least 7 killed, dozens of homes destroyed. In fact, it is so bad in Portugal right there that the Prime Minister has declared what they call a state of calamity to try to get more funds in to fight the fires. Well, it is day 3 of the Coast Guard's public hearing into how that Titan submersible imploded during an OceanGate expedition to the Titanic last year. Moments ago, a former OceanGate mission specialist wrapped up testimony with an emotional closing statement. She pleaded for Ocean Expedition to continue despite the Titan tragedy. Listen.
Nothing is going to bring our friends back. I hope that this investigation creates an understanding that with exploration, there's risk. And without taking that risk and the exploration, the world will still be flat. I hope that innovation continues so we can make the oceans accessible to people like me.
OceanGate's former scientific director is also expected to testify today. Now this. Eye on America is the daily commitment by CBS News to you to tell your stories where you live in your community. So let's talk about money. The Fed's decision to cut interest rates is sure to bring a lot of relief for prospective homeowners. But those looking to buy really can't get into housing that doesn't exist. You heard Jill Schlesinger talk about the fact that we can't build housing fast enough. Experts say as many as 6 million new homes are needed to meet the demand. CBS News national consumer correspondent Asha Qureshi introduces you to a growing movement to add new housing.
So this is my favorite one. I might have to put this one upstairs in my office.
For the first time in her 67 years, Rebecca Hemmons is settling into a home she owns.
So that was always a dream and a goal for me.
A dream and a goal that wasn't very easy to achieve.
Not at all.
Though it's not exactly how she imagined it.
Once I had this dream about living in a single-family home and sitting on my porch with my table of lemonade and glasses for the neighbors to wave at.
She couldn't afford a single-family home near Minneapolis, but multi-family housing made her dream of homeownership possible.
Looking for housing is a tedious journey.
How big of a problem is affordable housing in the Twin Cities?
It's a huge problem, and it's getting worse and worse year over year. Just as an example, the past 5 years, I think our median housing price has increased by $100,000, which is a huge increase.
Realtor Paige Kale is part of a growing nationwide coalition of pro-housing advocates who think more building density can solve the problem. It's called the YIMBY movement, short for Yes in My Backyard. It pushes for an end to single-family zoning, making way for more multiple-unit buildings to create more affordable housing.
So if you have 4 units on a single-family site, as opposed to 1 unit, you're able to, spread out the land costs and the infrastructure costs to 4 different housing units.
Minneapolis passed a plan to do that by 2040, but environmentalists and some homeowners oppose the changes.
The 2040 plan will hurt the uniqueness, the character, and the architectural heritage and charm of many single-family home neighborhoods.
It's controversial.
There were a lot of people in community that had strong feelings about it, for sure.
Aline Chermeroff is with the Minneapolis Federal Reserve.
Of course, the real question is, will it work?
Well, it's yet to be known.
Over the next 10 years, she'll track the plan's economic impact.
This is not going to happen overnight.
Correct. Even if you drive down the street, you can see a lot of cranes, and I think from that standpoint, I would say that that's positive, that there's a number of new units coming online every year.
Minnesota lawmakers have been considering taking the rezoning reform statewide. Other places that have also implemented YIMBY policies include California, Oregon, Massachusetts, and Montana.
None of the single-family homes that I looked for matched my budget, for one, and for two, there were too many things that needed to be done that I would have to come up with more to get it looking the way that I wanted it to.
Advocates say rezoning could help more Americans like Hemmons find affordable options.
This is the first. I'm the first person in my family to be a homeowner. First time.
That's quite an accomplishment.
It is.
Homeownership redefined and neighborhoods reshaped. For Eye on America, I'm Asha Qureshi in Minneapolis.
News in your neighborhoods. Keep it tuned to CBS News 24/7 when news breaks. The headlines always right here in the palm of your hand.